Live from the City Building in Athens, Ohio, your local source for live city meetings, TGC 15 presents Athens City Council.
Good evening. Welcome to Athens City Council. Tonight is Monday, August the 11th, 2008. We are coming to you from a different room since the usual City Council chambers are being altered. Tonight we are starting at 6:30 with a public hearing in regards to the permitted uses in the B3 General Business Zone. Let's move on to Member Phillips, who will go over our public hearing.
So whenever we are considering a change to the zoning code, we're required to have a public hearing. We asked the Planning Commission to take a look at this, and the Planning Commission made a recommendation that we make this change. The change that's being discussed is not the noise issue that has been in the media a little bit more recently, but simply the distance limitation for restaurants in a B3 zone. So we're moving back to the way it had been previously, where just a regular restaurant would be permitted in a B3 zone, and one with a drive-through would have that 200-foot distance limitation from a residential zone. So that's the issue that's under consideration, and this is a public hearing, so it's an opportunity for members of the public to talk to us and let us know their views on this question.
Is there anyone wishing to speak to council regarding this issue before us? Mayor Weil.
I would bring up that this is to correct a mistake kind of in 2003, I think, zoning code that was changed. If you look at the original strikeouts, they struck out the entire section of allowing restaurants in B3 zones in general, or any other than within a certain range, and that kind of made it difficult for some development. So this is correcting an error in that sense.
And the only other thing that I would throw out, because it's come from several or a couple of business owners in town, that I'm glad you corrected the record, that this has really nothing to do with the noise considerations that have been before our city, that is coming up, that we will have opportunities for citizen input.
There'll be 2 public hearings.
Yes. So there will be 2 other public hearings on that, and whether and where a restaurant is able to serve people outside.
Correct.
Yeah. So that is a different issue that's coming up before us, and you will have an opportunity to speak. Isn't this perfect? Mayor Weil, I have a feeling you scheduled this. Or those city workers out there.
Quite possibly. At least they're not with chainsaws.
One more opportunity. Is there anyone that would wish to speak before council on this issue? Seeing none, we will call a close to this public hearing and move on to a special session of City Council. And just for everyone's edification, under rules of council, a special session is a limited agenda. You don't find many of the things on a special session agenda that you do during a regular session of council agenda. We do have a quorum with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All members of council are present. Ordinances for third reading. Ordinance 8508, an ordinance amending Athens City Code, Title 23, Zoning Code, Chapter 23.04, Permitted Uses in the B3 General Business Zone. Where have we heard about this recently, Member Phillips?
Mr. President, I move adoption of 8508.
Second.
This ordinance we've just discussed in a public hearing, and again, this really corrects a situation that had been changed in 2000 that I believe inadvertently put that 200-foot distance limitation in place for all restaurants, and this removes that, so it only applies to drive-thrus and the specific restaurants that were originally reflected. Given the code before we make this correction, actually the B3 was more restrictive than the B2D, and that really was not the intention. So that was a change that council had made in 2000, and we are correcting that.
And I would add, it's not been an unusual occurrence for City Council to allow an ordinance to go through its readings prior to the final public hearing due to the fact of many time constraints and the need to get some things done. Is there further discussion on Ordinance 85? All those in favor of the ordinance?
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance has been adopted. Ordinances for second reading. Ordinance 9008, an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an agreement for the extension of city sewer services beyond the corporate limit and authorizing tap installation. Member Bain.
Mr. President, at this time, I'd like to move to table 9008.
Second.
The reason for the tabling is we've had no additional communication as requested.
Is there further discussion on tabling the ordinance only? All those in favor of tabling the ordinance?
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance has been tabled. Ordinance 9208, an ordinance authorizing a lease agreement with the Ohio Valley Museum of Discovery. Ordinances for first reading. Ordinance 9308, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an LPA federal project agreement with the state of Ohio through the Director of Transportation for the construction of an access road to Holzer Clinic and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is related to the construction of the access road by Holzer Clinic, and it allows the mayor to enter into the LPA agreement with the state of Ohio through the Department of Transportation for the construction of an access road to Holzer Clinic and declares an emergency. I do have a little bit of background information that might be helpful. The grant funds for this project have been awarded by the Appalachian Regional Commission, and it's administered by the Ohio Department of Transportation. And as with many grants, there's a cost share requirement. And the cost share for this project is 1.498 acres of property, which has been donated by Holzer Clinic. An additional requirement of this Regional Commission grant is that the property must be appraised by a Department of Transportation certified appraiser. Once it's appraised, the project will be open for bid for 3 weeks. The ordinance also corrects the language on the easement, which originally stated the state of Ohio is assuming the property, but it's the city of Athens assuming the property. And this ordinance is going to be considered under emergency. Is that?
Suspension.
Well,
Or suspension?
we haven't had a motion for suspension of the rules yet. Is that what you wish to do?
Yes, that is.
Okay. Motion for suspension. Is there a second? Motion and a second. For all the reasons that you've mentioned
Yes,
already?
Already.
Okay. And the time constraint on these. Is there further discussion on suspension of the rules only? All those in favor of suspending the rules on the ordinance?
Aye.
Opposed? The rules are suspended.
Okay, Mr. President, I move for approval of the ordinance.
Second.
For all the reasons.
stated just previously and the explanation.
Very. Member Phillips?
Mr. President, I just want to make sure everyone's clear. We discussed this when it came through committee and when it's been before us earlier, but I want to reiterate the fact that we are not spending any city taxpayer funds on this project, that this is, the local match is being provided by Holzer.
That's correct.
Yes.
Thank you.
Further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of ordinance 9308?
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance is adopted. Ordinance 9408, an ordinance amending the 2008 appropriation ordinance. Member Sands.
Mr. President, at this time, I ask that we consider ordinance 9408 under suspension of the rules.
Second.
If members of council have looked at this ordinance, they'll see that it actually puts in place the appropriations necessary to receive the grant funds and private funding for this Holzer project. And since we understood the time constraints with regards to the contracts here, that we also need to set the financing in motion to keep up with that. There's also another section to this ordinance that appropriates $3,500 to the street fund 220, which is reimbursement funds. The street department actually had an overpayment quite a substantial overpayment for some damages and about $2,800, and they need to make that refund. Again, it's a substantial refund. We prefer not to wait until September to do that. And then this $3,500 will allow them a little bit of balance in that refund lines for more regular reimbursements. So we have two sections.
An
The holes are-
overpayment on a, never heard of such a thing.
What it was,
Okay.
you want to discuss it?
I find it kind of intriguing, I guess, more than
Actually,
anything.
this is repaying the insurance company. When we had that break-in to the service garage earlier in the year, where the damage was done, if I understand this correctly, right?
Actually, no.
No, it's
not
another-
the insurance company.
Okay,
The break-in, that was, there was a payment by the person who did the damages.
mm-hmm,
And we have already received the check. And when it was presented to court, the spreadsheet had a list of costs to the street department, and there were some to the police department. And then it had a little breakdown in the corner, and those two amounts were added together, but the breakdown was actually included in the other part. So he overpaid the amount owed for damage and restitution. We received the check, and we've had it, deposited for a couple weeks. So out of fairness, we really should refund the amount that he owes us before September sometime.
No wonder I've never heard of such a thing. It's
Well,
kind of
I
an
know, it's
unusual
not very often,
occurrence.
does it?
Okay.
Yes.
yes.
Okay, thank you for that, Jim, I'm sorry.
And so, for those reasons, I ask suspension on this ordinance.
Okay. Is there further discussion on suspension of the rules on ordinance 9408?
Suspension, okay.
All those in favor of suspending the rules?
Aye.
Opposed? The rules are suspended.
Mr. President, I move adoption of ordinance 9408.
Second.
Again, the reasons I've already discussed.
Okay, further discussion on adoption. All those in favor of adoption of ordinance 9408?
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance is adopted. On to resolutions for second reading. Resolution 0608, a resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor. Member Sands.
Mr. President, this is a three-reading resolution, and we'll
Okay, yeah.
read it again in September.
Thank you. Announcements and other business. We have before us a reconsideration of a mayoral veto of ordinance 7408. Ordinance 7408, an ordinance authorizing the payment of service credit to the Ohio Police and Fire Pension Fund. Member Bain.
Speaking of rare events, Mr. President, I move we reconsider the mayoral veto of 07408.
An override of the mayoral
Override,
veto.
thank you.
Yes.
I told you it was rare.
Is there discussion?
Do we have a second?
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay.
And then upon the advice of the president, he said, don't talk about it. So I've already said my piece. I will be willing to try it again. I don't have my notes with me, but
Mayor Weil.
Okay, I believe that you, some letters were put into your mailbox. I don't know if you still have them or you received them just recently. Two of them were from the Ask Me, one dating October 18th, 2006, which was the grievance hearing itself. You can read it, it's a two-pager. The discussion, of course, Pat, in the back end, which was obviously the opinion of the board who had the hearing. Approval of light duty had not begun until recommended by the Bureau of Workmen's Comp after this time period, which is true. The issue, however, is not light duty. Light duty only arose after the grievance was advised the pension issue with his pension fund. Unfortunately, we cannot agree with the payment of the retirement fund payments beyond the terms of the current contract relief denied. The reason why I bring this up is because it implies to me when I read this is that really the question of light duty did not come up until the pension aspect was in play. In other words, from my point of view, the worker was not really worried about it until the pension issue came up, and therefore light duty, there was nobody saying, give me light duty, but rather, give me light duty because my pension's in trouble. So therefore, that's why I had a problem, that's why I vetoed it. That's one of the reasons why I vetoed it. And again, I just make the case again. You also have the other letter dated November 6th of 2007, where the union decided not to withdrew the grievance.
Mr. President, I guess I'll have to talk. The first thing that I would point out is there was a considerable time lapse between the events surrounding the injured back and the notification that the person involved was not covered by workers' comp. And I think the messenger has pointed this out. I did not bring it up last time, probably as many as 5 years. It's an extraordinary thing. Let's go ahead and face it. Just as we paid Andy Stone's tuition, just as we paid tuition for the other person who went to Hawking on GIS. I'd say that I cannot say beyond a shadow of a doubt, although Jim Knapp told me he asked for light duty. Workers' comp said he was ready for light duty, but he was denied light duty. That's all. We have that on paper somewhere else. But let's go back and look at it. I don't understand personally why the mayor's going to the wall on this, but we're talking about a person who was injured on the job, who was under workers' comp coverage, which meant that his income was first 75% and then 66% of his total income. So in other words, he had a reduced circumstances. Meanwhile, he's in serious pain. He wasn't injured playing rugby. He was injured doing work for us. Now, maybe that's something in the future, just as we remedied Andy Stone's tuition payment, we can say, let's have a better way of dealing with back injuries. But the fact is that he wandered on in good faith till 2006, thinking he was covered, even though he wasn't allowed to do light duty. And he then got the letter, and everything started in 2006, but there were 3 or 4 or 5 years of discrepancy between that when he was sitting around waiting, assuming that everything was okay. And policies change, and I know the mayor believes that this is a administrative matter. But the last administrative matter we corrected was, again, I'll say Andy Stone's tuition and that other person's tuition, whose name I can't remember, who no longer works for us. And so, sometimes we have to do things that are important to an individual. According to Jim Knapp, in his statement to me, there was no way you could grieve it because there was no money to be gained. The money has to come from the city somehow. I guess that I would say, if I were judging this as an outsider, that maybe Human Resources or somebody like that should have known that he wasn't covered. And that's basically it, So we're just covering for a problem that a worker had who works hard for us. I had a sore back last time, so I was probably much more eloquent from moving and I didn't fall off a bar stool or anything. I was moving a wheelbarrow full of dirt and I didn't lift it properly. But he was moving hoses in the fire station. He was working for us. And he's penalized because he didn't know that he wasn't covered. Nobody in the city knew he wasn't covered until 3 or 4 or 5 years later, for goodness sakes. Now let's just get right on task here and say, I'd like to consider this and have a vote up or down so I can get off it.
Are there other council members wishing to make a comment first? Mayor Weil.
I would point out that what you're saying is we're correcting somebody who, I tell you the truth, I do not know what my pension situation is. I couldn't tell you what my pension looks like. I don't look at this stuff, so therefore I'd be just as lax as he would of not following my own pension trail. Whether I would take it to the city saying my ignorance needs to be paid by you is one matter. In terms of the tuition reimbursement, as far as I understand, that was actually to cover a policy that was required from the state auditors, that we institute a policy, that we make sure that policy is done correctly. The reimbursement had already been in place, if I understand correctly. We just had to do it pro forma. And the fact is that, yes, this fellow is not going to be, if he wants his pension paid back, we can do it as a city, or he can do it. And I understand it's a chunk of money, but it's a chunk of money that's going to extend over so many years. It's not like it's going to be, I understand pension enough to know that if I didn't have some pension, I could buy it back, especially from the state system. Any state system, if I understand correctly. And again, I am not an expert in this field. And I just have the documents in front of me. I do not have any documents saying he wanted light duty. I just have the grievance hearing where it says it was not an issue until he found out his pension was not being filled. And that's after the fact, from my point of view.
Member Sands.
Mr. President, I just reiterate what I said before, that, again, I believe that a pension is part of a compensation package, which is a negotiated item between the city and the union, the firefighters union, and I hesitate to tread on those in that area without negotiation.
Other members of council.
Mr. President, could we please reiterate that the pension situation is set by state law? It's not negotiated.
I didn't realize. Thank you.
It is. I mean, we are told what we pay and the rules. We just weren't up to speed on the rules 5 years ago is what it happens. So it's like Andy's tuition. Let's get on with it.
Are there further comments? All those in favor of the mayoral override of ordinance 7408?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
I'm counting 6-1. The ordinance has been overridden. The mayoral veto has been overridden. The ordinance shall take effect. Having addressed all items on our agenda and seeing no one wishing to speak further, we now stand adjourned.
Good luck with the minutes.